The summer sun beat down on Eleanor Montgomery's weathered hands as she worked the soil around her yarrow plants. Her fingers, once soft and unblemished, now bore the marks of a decade of frontier life, calluses from chopping firewood, tiny scars from thorns and brambles, stains from the herbs she harvested to heal the sick. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dark earth across her forehead. Cottonwood Springs was suffering through the hottest July anyone could remember. Even the mockingbirds had fallen silent in the scorching afternoon heat. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A groan, carried on the gentle breeze coming from the direction of Whispering Creek. In another life, Eleanor might have ignored it, might have continued with her gardening, her mind set on finishing before sunset, but 10 years as the only healer for 20 miles had taught her that sounds like that usually meant someone was hurting. And in the untamed Texas hill country of 1875, hurt people who weren't tended to quickly often became dead people by morning. Before she tells you what happened next, before she reveals how that single moment would forever alter the course of her life, and the lives of everyone in Cottonwood Springs, Eleanor Montgomery wants to know where you're tuning in from today. And if this story touches your heart the way it touched hers, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow she's saved something extra special just for you. This is a story about courage in the face of prejudice, about finding connection where others see only differences, about how sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in any bottle or jar, but in the moments when we choose compassion over fear. This is what happened the day Eleanor Montgomery saved a dying Comanche chief from snakebite, and the extraordinary events that followed. The basket of freshly harvested herbs tumbled from Eleanor's hands as she hurried toward the creek, her skirts hitched above her ankles. At 43, she moved with the efficiency of someone who had long ago shed any concern for how others might judge her hurrying figure. "Hello?" she called out. "Is someone there?" Another groan answered her, weaker this time. Eleanor quickened her pace. The creek came into view, its normally rushing waters reduced to a languid trickle by the summer drought. There, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods, lay a figure on the ground. Eleanor approached cautiously. Living on the frontier had taught her prudence alongside mercy. As she drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. A man lay sprawled. On his side, one leg bent at an awkward angle. But it wasn't his position that made Eleanor's heart hammer against her ribs. It was who he was. The intricate tattoos adorning his chest, the eagle feather braided into his long black hair, and, most tellingly, the distinctive paint markings on his face told her everything she needed to know. This was no ordinary Comanche warrior. The elaborate patterns, the ceremonial bear claw necklace, this was a chief. His eyes fluttered open as her shadow fell across him. Dark, pain-filled eyes that regarded her with equal parts suspicion and desperation. "Water," he managed in accented English. Eleanor's hand moved to the small canteen at her waist. She uncorked it and knelt beside him, gently lifting his head to help him drink. As she did, she noticed the angry red puncture wounds on his calf, the flesh around them already swollen and discolored. "Rattlesnake," she murmured. "When?" "Sun. There." He gestured weakly toward the eastern sky, indicating mid-morning. Hours ago, Eleanor's medical training from the war kicked in, assessing his condition with clinical precision. The venom had been in his system for too long. His breathing was shallow, his skin clammy despite the heat. Most town doctors would shake their heads and say there was nothing to be done. But Eleanor Montgomery wasn't most doctors. "I can help you," she said firmly, meeting his gaze, "but I need to get you to my cabin." He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with what seemed like tremendous effort, he nodded once. "My name," he said, between labored breaths, rising thunder. "I'm Eleanor," she replied, already tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. "But most folks around here just call me Ellie." Getting him to her cabin was a brutal test of both their endurance. Though Ellie was stronger than her frame suggested, years of hauling water and chopping wood had seen to that. Rising thunder outweighed her by at least 70 pounds. Even with his arm draped across her shoulders and his effort to support his own weight, their progress was agonizingly slow. By the time they reached her cabin, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of amber and gold. Rising Thunder's condition had deteriorated. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Ellie helped him onto her bed, ignoring the voice in her head that reminded her what the good people of Cottonwood Springs would say if they knew she'd brought a Comanche chief into her home, into her bed no less. Such concerns seemed trivial compared to the life ebbing away before her eyes. She worked methodically, drawing on every scrap of knowledge she'd accumulated. First from her formal training as a nurse during the war, then from the dog-eared medical texts she'd scrounged and saved for, and finally from the wisdom shared by a Cherokee woman who had once saved Ellie's life when conventional medicine had failed. Ellie cleaned the wound, applied a poultice of crushed plantain leaves and echinacea, and prepared a tincture of yarrow and willow bark to bring down his fever. As darkness fell, she lit a lamp and continued her vigil, spooning small amounts of the bitter medicine between his cracked lips, refreshing the poultice when it grew warm, and bathing his face with cool cloths. "Fight," she whispered, when his breathing became so shallow she feared each exhalation might be his last. "Your people need you to fight, sometime in the darkest hours of the night, when even the cicadas had fallen silent. Rising thunder began to convulse. Ellie held him down as best she could, preventing him from injuring himself further as the venom and fever ravaged his system. When the seizure finally subsided, he lay unnaturally still. For one terrible moment, Ellie thought she had lost him. Then his chest rose with a shallow breath, and she released her own breath, unaware she'd been holding it. Dawn found her slumped in a chair beside the bed, exhausted but vigilant. Rising Thunder's fever had broken sometime before sunrise, and while he remained unconscious, his breathing had steadied. The angry red streaks that had been climbing from the wound toward his heart had receded somewhat. Ellie allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. He would live, provided infection didn't set in, and provided she could keep him hidden long enough for him to regain his strength. That second provision, she realized as hoofbeats approached her cabin, might prove more challenging than fighting. The snake's venom. Ellie quickly pulled a quilt over Rising Thunder's still form, tucking it around his distinctive features. She smoothed her rumpled skirts, pinned back strands of gray-streaked hair that had escaped her bun, and went to the door. Marshal Wade Thornton sat astride his dun gelding, his weathered face set in lines of suspicion beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 50, the lawman had the hard, lean look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors, and the cold eyes of someone who'd seen too much violence to be impressed by much of anything. "Morning, Miss Montgomery," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be simultaneously polite and dismissive. "Marshal," she replied, not stepping outside or inviting him in. "What brings you out this way?" "Ranches. Boy spotted Comanche tracks heading this direction yesterday," he said, his pale blue eyes scanning what he could see of her cabin's interior. "Wounded, from the look of it. Blood on the rocks down by the creek." "I haven't seen anyone," Ellie said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Mind if I take a look around?" It wasn't really a question. "Actually, I do mind," she replied. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've been up all night with a fever, and I'm not feeling particularly sociable. Thornton's eyes narrowed. A fever, you say? Might explain why you're looking so disheveled. I am a healer, Marshal. Occasionally I get sick too. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft nickering of Thornton's horse. These aren't just any Comanche tracks, Miss Montgomery, Thornton finally said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. Word is, it might be one of their chiefs, Rising Thunder himself. He watched her face closely as he spoke the name, looking for any reaction. Ellie kept her expression neutral through years of practice at a battlefield hospital, where showing fear or disgust only upset the wounded men further. The same Rising Thunder whose band killed the Miller family last spring, she asked, feigning mild interest. Thornton nodded grimly. The very same. So you understand why I need to search the area thoroughly. I understand you have a job to do, Ellie conceded. But unless you have a warrant, I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my privacy and my property line. Something dangerous flickered in Thornton's eyes. You know, some folks in town already think it's mighty peculiar. A woman living out here, alone, mixing up your potions and salves. Some might even call it witchcraft. He smiled without warmth. Would be a shame if those rumors got any more traction. The threat hung in the air between them. Ellie had heard the whispers, of course, had noticed how some mothers pulled their children closer when she walked by. But she also knew that when those same children fell ill with fever or croup, their parents came knocking at her door, desperation overwhelming superstition. Are you threatening me, Marshal Thornton? She asked quietly. Just making an observation, he replied, gathering his reins. I'll be back, Miss Montgomery, with a warrant if that's what it takes. He wheeled his horse around and trotted off, leaving Ellie standing in her doorway, heart pounding despite her outwardly calm demeanor. Inside, she hurried back to Rising Thunder's side. His eyes were open, alert despite the pain evident in the tight lines around his mouth. He searches for me, the chief said, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. Yes, Ellie confirmed, checking his bandages. And he'll be back. Rising Thunder's expression darkened. The Miller family. I did not. You don't need to explain yourself to me, Ellie interrupted, though the denial did ease something in her chest. Right now, we need to focus on getting you well enough to travel. Why do you help me? He asked, studying her, face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Your people and mine. We are enemies. Ellie busied herself mixing a fresh poultice, buying time to consider her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with remembered pain. During the war, I was a nurse. Young men would be brought to me, torn apart by bullets and shrapnel. Boys, really, most of them. In their pain, they couldn't tell blue from gray anymore. They were just humans, suffering. I swore then that I would never again let someone suffer if I had the power to ease their pain, no matter what side they fought on. She applied the fresh poultice to his wound, noting with satisfaction that the swelling had decreased significantly. Besides, she added with a small smile, who would turn away a chief? It'd be poor hospitality. A ghost of a smile touched Rising Thunder's lips. You are unusual, Eleanor Montgomery. So I've been told, she replied dryly. Now, drink this. It tastes terrible, but it will help your body fight the poison still in your system. As she tended to him throughout the day, Rising Thunder told her fragments of his story, how he had been scouting alone against the advice of his warriors when the rattlesnake struck, how he had tried to treat the wound himself but had become too weak to continue, how he had crawled to the creek, hoping to at least die with water nearby. In turn, Ellie shared pieces of her own life, how she had come to Texas after losing her husband in the war, how she had built this cabin with her own hands, how she had learned to combine her nursing training with herbal remedies to care for people others had given up on. By nightfall, Rising Thunder was able to sit up and take broth. Ellie knew his remarkable recovery wasn't just due to her ministrations. The chief had an extraordinary constitution and a will to match it. Still, she allowed herself a moment of professional pride. That pride was short-lived. Just after sundown, she heard the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching. Peering through her window, she saw Marshal Thornton returning. This time with 4 deputies and Dr. Samuel Harrison, the town physician who had made no secret of his disdain for Ellie's primitive healing methods. "We need to hide you," she said urgently, turning back to Rising Thunder. But he was already on his feet, swaying slightly but standing on his own. "No," he said firmly, "I will not ask you to lie for me again." "Don't be ridiculous," Ellie snapped, the fear making her tone sharper than intended. "You can barely stand. If Thornton finds you here, he'll hang you from the nearest tree. And he might not be too kind to me either." Rising Thunder placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "They will not find me," he promised. "My people have ways of moving unseen." Before she could argue further, he had gathered his few possessions and moved to the back window with a grace that belied his injured state. "4 days," he said, turning back to her, "when the moon is new. Watch for my sign at the Medicine Rock." And then he was gone, slipping into the gathering darkness like a shadow, leaving Ellie to face Marshal Thornton and his posse alone. She barely had time to compose herself before pounding rattled her front door. "Open up, Miss Montgomery," Thornton's voice boomed. "I have a warrant to search these premises." Ellie took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and opened the door. Thornton thrust a piece of paper toward her, but she ignored it, focusing instead on Dr. Harrison, who stood slightly behind the marshal. "Doctor," she acknowledged, with a coolness that matched the winter winds. "I didn't realize you'd taken to assisting with law enforcement now." Harrison, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and the perpetually aggrieved expression of someone who believes the world fails to appreciate his genius, sniffed disdainfully. "The marshal requested my professional opinion on certain matters," he replied. "It seems you might have been treating a Comanche warrior for snakebite, a decidedly dangerous undertaking, medically and otherwise." "And what makes you think that?" Ellie asked, even as Thornton and his deputies pushed past her into the cabin. "Blood on the rocks by the creek," Thornton called over his shoulder as he began methodically searching the small space. "And a trail leading directly to your property. Nowhere else." Ellie remained in the doorway, arms crossed, as the men upended her bed, opened her trunk, and examined every corner of her home. She tried not to wince as they handled her carefully organized herb supplies with careless hands, dropping precious, dried plants onto the floor. "There's no one here," one of the deputies finally reported. Thornton's face darkened with frustration. "Check outside, the woodshed, under the porch, everywhere." As the deputies scattered to continue their search, Dr. Harrison approached Ellie, his voice lowered to avoid being overheard by the others. "You know, Eleanor," he said, using her first name with a familiarity he hadn't earned, "your methods have always been unorthodox, but harboring enemies of the town, enemies who have killed women and children, that goes beyond unorthodox. That's dangerous." "I treat the sick and injured, Samuel," she replied. "I don't ask for their life history or judge their worthiness before deciding whether they deserve to live or die." Harrison's face flushed. "That kind of thinking is precisely why women are unsuited for medical practice. You let sentiment cloud your judgment." Ellie laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I've sewn men back together while cannonballs exploded around me. I've amputated limbs without flinching." Don't talk to me about sentiment, Doctor. Their conversation was interrupted by Thornton's return. The marshal's expression was thunderous. "He was here," he stated flatly. "Fresh blood on your sheets. Poultices made from the same plants the Indians use for snakebite." He took a menacing step toward her. "Where is he, Miss Montgomery?" "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Thornton's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "That's obstruction of justice." "No," came a new voice from the doorway. "It's being a decent human being." Jacob Wilson stood framed in the entrance, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. The rancher's weathered face was set in lines of disapproval as he surveyed the scene. "Evening, Jake," Thornton said, his hand moving away from his weapon. "This doesn't concern you. When you and your men start terrorizing a lady who's done nothing but good for this community, it concerns me plenty," Wilson replied, stepping into the cabin. "And I reckon it would concern a fair number of other folks in town, too, folks whose children are alive today because of Miss Montgomery's healing." A tense silence fell. Ellie knew Jacob Wilson was respected in Cottonwood Springs. His ranch employed half the men in town, and he'd been fair and honest in his dealings for the 20 years he'd lived there. Even Thornton couldn't afford to dismiss him outright. "We're conducting an official investigation," Thornton finally said. "We have reason to believe Miss Montgomery has been harboring a dangerous Comanche warrior, possibly even Rising Thunder himself." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "The same Rising Thunder who returned the Peterson boy unharmed last winter when the child wandered off. The one who's kept the peace along our borders for 3 years while other bands raided. The one whose warriors were seen near the Miller homestead before it was attacked," Thornton countered. "Seen, but not proven to be responsible," Wilson corrected. He turned to Ellie. "Miss Montgomery, have you treated any patients for snakebite recently?" Ellie met his gaze steadily. "I treated Mrs. Fletcher's boy last week for a copperhead bite. You're welcome to ride out and ask her if you don't believe me." It wasn't a direct lie. She had indeed treated young Tommy Fletcher. The fact that she'd also treated Rising Thunder was simply information she chose not to volunteer. Wilson nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "There you have it, Marshal. A reasonable explanation for any medical supplies you might have found." Thornton's jaw worked as he considered his options. Finally, he gestured to his deputies. "We're done here, for now." As they filed out, Harrison paused beside Ellie. "This isn't over," he murmured. "People will hear about this. They'll start to wonder whose side you're really on." After they'd gone, leaving her cabin in disarray, Ellie sank onto a chair, suddenly exhausted. Jacob Wilson remained, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, setting her overturned table to rights. "Thornton's not wrong about one thing. This isn't over. Once word spreads, some folks will take his side. People are scared of what they don't understand, and most don't understand the Comanche ways." "Or mine," Ellie added with a tired smile. Wilson's weathered face softened. "You did the right thing, Ellie. Whatever you did, and I'm not asking for details. I know you were following your conscience." "My conscience might get me run out of town," she observed. "Or worse," he agreed, soberly. "You should stay with my sister in town for a few days. Just until things settle down." Ellie shook her head. "I can't leave. I have patients who might need me." Wilson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stubborn as always. At least let me help you set this place to rights before I go." Together, they restored order to the cabin, working in companionable silence. Before leaving, Wilson paused at the door. "Be careful, Ellie," he said softly. "And if you need anything at all, send word." After he'd gone, Ellie barred her door, and sank onto her bed, now stripped of its blood-stained sheets. She was under no illusions about what the next few days would bring. By noon tomorrow, the entire town would know of Thornton's suspicions. By evening, those suspicions would have transformed into certainty in the minds of many. She thought of Rising Thunder's words, 4 days when the moon is new. Watch for my sign at the medicine rock. Gee, what did he mean? Was he coming back? The very thought sent a flutter of something, alarm, anticipation through her chest. 4 days, she murmured to herself. I just need to survive 4 days. The following morning dawned clear and hot, the sun rising like a vengeful eye over the eastern hills. Ellie had slept fitfully, waking at every creak and rustle. Now she moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, trying to prepare herself for whatever the day might bring. She didn't have to wait long. As she was hanging laundry on the line behind her cabin, she heard the unmistakable sound of wagon wheels approaching. Shielding her eyes against the glare, she made out Martha Wilkins's buggy coming up the dusty track. The storekeeper's wife was alone, which was unusual and troubling. Martha rarely went anywhere without her circle of friends, the self-appointed moral guardians of Cottonwood Springs. Eleanor, Martha called as she drew her horse to a halt. She didn't dismount. I've come to deliver a message. Ellie approached the buggy, wiping her hands on her apron. Good morning, Martha. What message would that be? Martha Wilkins was a small woman with shrewd eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently pursed in disapproval. Today, that mouth was set in an even tighter line than usual. The Ladies' Aid Society has decided that your presence will not be required at future meetings, Martha announced without preamble. Furthermore, we feel it would be best if you didn't attend Sunday services for the time being. Ellie had expected something like this, but the reality of it still stung. The Ladies' Aid Society wasn't just a social group. They organized assistance for families in need, raised funds for the school, and generally served as the heart of the community. Being excluded meant more than missing out on quilting bees and potluck suppers. It meant being cut off from the town's support network. I see, Ellie said carefully. And may I ask what prompted this decision? Martha sniffed. Don't play innocent, Eleanor. Marshal Thornton told the committee what he found at your cabin. Dr. Harrison has confirmed that you've been treating an injured Comanche warrior, possibly even Rising Thunder himself. Dr. Harrison confirmed no such thing, Ellie replied, struggling to keep her voice level. He saw blood-stained sheets and healing herbs, nothing more. Where there's smoke, there's fire, Martha retorted. And besides, it's not the first time you've shown more concern for them than for your own kind. The accusation hung in the air between them. Martha was referring to last winter when Ellie had treated 3 Comanche children for whooping cough, bringing them into town when their condition worsened, ignoring the protests of some townsfolk who feared contagion, or worse, that the children's presence might draw an attack. I treat the sick, Martha, Ellie said, repeating the same defense she'd offered then. I don't turn people away based on the color of their skin or the language they speak. That kind of thinking will get you killed, Martha said, gathering her reins, or worse, get the rest of us killed. She hesitated, then added in a slightly gentler tone, There's talk of a town meeting tomorrow to discuss your situation. You might want to consider packing your things before then. With that parting shot, she clicked to her horse and turned the buggy around, leaving Ellie standing alone in a cloud of dust. Throughout the day, Ellie alternated between fury and despair as she went about her tasks. By late afternoon, she had worked herself into a state of grim resolve. She would not flee. This was her home, built with her own hands on land she had purchased legally. If the town wanted to drive her out, they would have to do it by force. As dusk approached, Ellie decided to visit the medicine rock. partly to look for rising thunders. Promised sign, but mostly because the ancient formation had always brought her a sense of peace. The massive boulder, balanced improbably on a much smaller stone base, had been a sacred site for the indigenous peoples of the region long before white settlers arrived. Ellie had often come here to gather certain rare herbs that grew in its shadow, and to think when her mind was troubled. The fading sunlight bathed the formation in golden light as she approached. Ellie circled it slowly, looking for anything unusual. A mark, a token, something that might be rising thunder's sign. Finding nothing, she sighed and settled on a smaller rock nearby, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "What am I doing?" she murmured to herself. "Risking everything for a man who might never return." But even as she voiced the doubt, she knew it wasn't entirely about rising thunder. It was about standing by her principles, about refusing to let fear dictate her actions. It was about being the person she had promised herself she would be when she first took up healing. As darkness fell in earnest, Ellie reluctantly rose to leave. It was then that she noticed it, so subtle she might have missed it entirely if the angle of the moonlight hadn't been just right. On the western face of the Medicine Rock, freshly carved but weathered to look like it had always been there, was a small symbol, a zigzag line with a circle above it. Lightning and thunder, rising thunder's sign. Ellie's heart quickened. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A message? A promise? She reached out to touch the carving, fingers tracing the shallow grooves in the ancient stone. As she did, a sound behind her made her whirl around, hand flying to the small knife she kept in her pocket. A figure stepped out from the shadows of a juniper tree, not rising thunder, as she had half feared, half hoped, but Jacob Wilson. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture, "but it's not safe for you to be out alone after dark, not with feelings running high in town." Ellie's racing heart slowed somewhat, though she didn't remove her hand from her knife. "What are you doing here, Jacob?" "Looking for you," he admitted. "I stopped by your cabin. When you weren't there, I figured you might have come here." He nodded toward the Medicine Rock. "You always said it was your thinking spot." Ellie studied him in the dim light. She had known Jacob Wilson for nearly a decade and had always considered him a friend, perhaps her only true friend in Cottonwood Springs. But times like these had a way of revealing where people's loyalties truly lay. "Did Martha Wilkins pay you a visit too?" she asked. He nodded grimly. "Along with Thornton and half the town council. They're building quite a case against you, Ellie." "And where do you stand?" Instead of answering directly, Jacob moved closer to the Medicine Rock, examining it thoughtfully. "My grandfather was a Cherokee scout for the army," he said. "Did I ever tell you that?" "No," Ellie replied, surprised by this revelation. "He used to say that a man should be judged by his actions, not by the color of his skin or the tribe he belongs to." Jacob turned to face her. "I reckon the same holds true for a woman." Relief washed through Ellie. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "The town meeting tomorrow, it's going to be ugly. Thornton's been stoking fears, talking about how rising thunder might return with his warriors to attack the town. He's claiming you're in league with them." That's absurd," Ellie protested. "Is it?" Jacob asked quietly, his gaze shifting to something over her shoulder. Ellie turned to follow his gaze and froze. There, etched faintly but unmistakably in the dirt beside the Medicine Rock, was a second symbol, a crescent moon with 4 marks beside it. 4 days until the new moon, rising thunder's promise. "What does it mean, Ellie?" Jacob asked, his voice carefully neutral. She met his eyes steadily. "I don't know," she answered truthfully, "but I intend to find out." The walk back to her cabin was tense with unspoken questions. Jacob insisted on escorting her, despite her protests that she knew the way blindfolded. As they approached her small homestead, a flicker of movement near the edge of her herb garden caught Ellie's attention. "Wait," she whispered, placing a restraining hand on Jacob's arm. "Someone's there." Jacob reached for the rifle slung across his back, but Ellie shook her head. "Let me approach first." Heart pounding, she moved forward cautiously. If Marshal Thornton had posted men to watch her cabin, confronting them with a weapon would only confirm their suspicions. But if it was someone else, someone in need of help, she didn't want to frighten them away. "Hello," she called softly. "Is someone there?" A figure rose from the shadows. A young Comanche woman, no more than 16 or 17. She was dressed in a deerskin dress adorned with beadwork, her long black hair bound in twin braids. In her arms, she cradled a bundle that moved and made a soft mewling sound. A baby. "Help," the young woman said in halting English, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Baby sick." Ellie's heart sank even as she hurried forward. This was the last complication she needed, more evidence for Thornton and the townspeople to use against her. But the Comanche woman's fear and the weak cries of the infant overrode all other considerations. "Bring the child inside," she said, gesturing toward her cabin. "Quickly." The young woman hesitated, her gaze darting to Jacob, who had lowered his rifle but still stood watchfully nearby. "He, friend," Ellie assured her. "He won't hurt you or the baby. Come." As they entered the cabin, Ellie lit a lamp and turned to the young woman. "What is your name?" "Morning Dove," she replied, carefully unwrapping the bundle to reveal a tiny infant, perhaps 2 or 3 months old, its small face flushed with fever. "And the baby?" "Little Thunder," Morning Dove said. "Son of Chief." Ellie's hand stilled, in the act of reaching for the child. "Rising Thunder's son." The young woman nodded, tears filling her eyes. "My husband say go to woman healer. She help when snake bite him." Rising Thunder's wife. This was Rising Thunder's wife and child. Ellie glanced at Jacob, who stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. There would be no hiding this, no explaining it away. By helping this woman and her baby, Ellie was making a choice that couldn't be undone. She took a deep breath and gently lifted the feverish infant from his mother's arms. "I'll help him," she promised, "whatever it takes." The light from Ellie's oil lamp cast long shadows across the cabin walls as she examined the infant. Little Thunder's skin burned with fever, his tiny chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. Morning. Dove hovered nearby, her dark eyes never leaving her child, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Jacob Wilson remained in the doorway, his weathered face a mask of conflicted emotions. He had been Ellie's friend for years, but this, harboring the wife and child of a Comanche chief, went beyond friendship. This was choosing a side in a conflict that had simmered beneath the surface of Cottonwood Springs for generations. "He needs willow bark tea for the fever," Ellie murmured, gently placing a cool cloth on the baby's forehead. "And I'll make a mild foxglove tincture to strengthen his heart." "Will he live?" Morning Dove asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellie met the young mother's gaze directly. "I'll do everything in my power to save him," she promised. It wasn't the unequivocal reassurance the woman wanted, but Ellie had seen too many infants slip away despite her best efforts to offer false hope. "Jacob," she said, turning to the rancher, "I need fresh water from the creek. The bucket's by the door." It was a simple request, but they both understood its significance. If he fetched the water, he was complicit in what she was doing. If he refused... Without a word, Jacob took the bucket and disappeared into the darkness. Ellie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Your husband," she said to Morning Dove as she prepared her medicines. "He is recovering well." "Yes," the young woman replied, a flicker of pride crossing her features. "Rising Thunder is strong. The snake spirit tried to take him, but his medicine is stronger." "Why did he send you here?" Ellie asked, carefully measuring dried willow bark into a pot of water. "Surely your people have healers of their own." Morning Dove's expression darkened. "Our medicine woman, she very old. Try many things for Little Thunder, but nothing work. Baby get worse." She touched the intricate beadwork at her throat, a protective gesture. "Rising Thunder say white woman healer has strong medicine, different medicine. Maybe what our son needs." A wave of humility washed over Ellie. She had spent years studying both Western medical texts and the healing traditions of various native peoples, combining approaches when conventional treatments failed. But to have earned such trust from a Comanche chief, a man whose people had every reason to distrust white settlers, was unexpected. "Your husband took a great risk sending you here," she observed, stirring the pot of brewing tea. "If Marshal Thornton found you—" "Rising Thunder say you take risk for him," Morning Dove replied simply. "Now we trust you with most precious thing, our son." The weight of that trust settled on Ellie's shoulders like a physical burden. She had already risked her standing in the community by helping Rising Thunder. Now, with his wife and child in her home, she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. The cabin door opened, and Jacob entered with the water. He set the bucket down without comment and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness as if expecting to see torches approaching. "You should go, Jacob," Ellie said softly. "The less you know, the better." He turned to face her, his expression troubled. "If I leave and word gets out that they're here—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "I know the risk," she replied. "Do you?" His voice was gentle but insistent. "Thornton's been looking for an excuse to drive you out since you contradicted his testimony at the Fletcher trial. This isn't just about you harboring Indians, Ellie. This is about you being a woman who doesn't know her place." The words stung because they held truth. 3 years ago, Ben Fletcher had been accused of stealing horses from the livery stable. Thornton had claimed he'd seen Fletcher riding one of the missing horses, but Ellie had testified that Fletcher was at her cabin at the time, suffering from a broken leg that made riding impossible. The charges were dismissed, and Thornton's credibility damaged. He hadn't forgotten the humiliation. "All the more reason for you to distance yourself," Ellie insisted. "I won't drag you down with me." Jacob's expression softened. "Maybe I'm tired of watching you fight every battle alone." A cry from the infant interrupted their exchange. Little Thunder's small body had gone rigid, his back arching as convulsions took hold. Morning Dove made a keening sound of distress, reaching for her child, but Ellie gently held her back. "Don't restrain him," she instructed, quickly removing the cloth from the baby's forehead. "It could make it worse. Just make sure he doesn't strike his head." The seizure lasted only a minute, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally subsided, Little Thunder lay limp and exhausted, his breathing even more labored than before. "The fever's too high," Ellie muttered, more to herself than to the others. "We need to bring it down quickly." She moved to her trunk and pulled out several jars of dried herbs, working with methodical precision despite the urgency of the situation. Years of battlefield medicine had taught her that panic was as deadly as any wound. "Jacob, there's a pouch of blue cohosh in the cupboard above the stove. Bring it to me," she directed. "And Morning Dove, I need you to help me prepare a bath for your son. Not cold, that would shock his system, but cool enough to bring down his temperature." As they worked together, Ellie kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the glow of approaching lanterns. Thornton might have men watching her cabin, waiting for evidence of her supposed treachery, if they discovered Mourning Dove and Little Thunder here. But she couldn't think about that now. The infant's life hung by a thread, and every moment was precious. The hours blurred together as Ellie fought for Little Thunder's life. The cool bath helped reduce his fever temporarily, but by midnight, it had spiked again. She administered the willow bark tea drop by drop, massaged a salve of lavender and menthol onto his tiny chest to ease his breathing, and prepared a tincture of foxglove so diluted it could safely be given to an infant. Mourning Dove never left her child's side, singing softly in her native tongue, prayer songs, Ellie guessed, though she couldn't understand the words. The young mother's unwavering faith was both humbling and terrifying. What if Ellie's medicines failed? What if Little Thunder slipped away despite her best efforts? "Tell me about your son," Ellie said gently, hoping to distract the worried mother while they waited for the latest treatment to take effect. "How old is he?" "3 moons," Mourning Dove replied, her fingers lightly tracing the curve of the baby's cheek. "Born when snow still on ground. Strong from beginning, rising thunder say he born with warrior's cry." "He's beautiful," Ellie said sincerely, noting the infant's perfectly formed features, so like his mother's. "And he is strong. See how he fights?" Mourning Dove nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "My first child," she whispered. "My heart outside my body." Ellie understood that sentiment all too well. Years ago, she had felt the same about her own son, William, born during the second year of the war. He had lived only 6 months before pneumonia took him. Her husband, away fighting, never even saw their child. Some wounds never fully healed. Jacob had positioned himself by the window, keeping watch. Occasionally, he would step outside to check the perimeter of the cabin, returning with soft-footed quietness. His presence was reassuring, though Ellie knew it placed him in as much danger as herself. Near dawn, Little Thunder's fever finally broke. The change was subtle at first, a slight cooling of his flushed skin, a more regular pattern to his breathing. By the time the first golden light of morning filtered through the cabin windows, the improvement was unmistakable. The infant's eyes, which had been closed or unfocused for hours, now tracked movement. His cries, though still weak, had more strength behind them. Mourning Dove wept with relief when Ellie confirmed what she already sensed. Her son would live. "Your medicine's strong," she said, clasping Ellie's hand in both of hers. "Rising Thunder right to trust you." Ellie smiled, exhaustion making her movements slow as she put away her herbs and tinctures. "Your son did the hard work," she replied. "He has his father's strength." Jacob returned from another perimeter check, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he reported. "At least 4, maybe more." Ellie's heart sank. "Thornton?" He nodded. "Appears so. How much time do we have?" 10 minutes, maybe less." Mourning Dove clutched Little Thunder to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "They take us?" "No," Ellie said firmly. "No one is taking you or your son." She turned to Jacob. "Is there a way to get them safely away from here?" He considered for a moment. "The ravine behind your garden connects to the creek bed. If they follow that for half a mile east, they'll reach a stand of cottonwoods where I keep a small shelter for when I'm checking fence lines. They could hide there until nightfall." "Will you show them the way?" Ellie asked. "What about you?" Jacob countered. "Thornton finds your cabin empty. He'll know you've run. He'll track you." "I'm not running," Ellie replied, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I'll be right here when they arrive." "Ellie, someone has to slow them down. Give Mourning Dove time to get away with the baby." She met his gaze squarely. "It has to be me. They're already suspicious of me. If you disappear too, they'll know you're involved." Jacob didn't argue further. He understood the logic, even if he didn't like it. "What's your plan?" I'll tell them I was gathering herbs at the Medicine Rock, that I spent the night there. It wasn't an unusual claim. She had often stayed out overnight when certain plants needed to be harvested at specific times. And if they search the cabin, they'll find evidence the baby was here. Ellie glanced around, noting the small cradleboard Mourning Dove had brought, the remnants of the medicine she'd prepared. I'll deal with that. Just get them safely to the shelter. Mourning Dove approached Ellie. Little Thunder nestled in the crook of her arm. With her free hand, she removed a beaded bracelet from her wrist. For protection, she said, pressing it into Ellie's palm. My people not forget what you do for Chief's son. Never forget. The sincerity in her voice made Ellie's throat tighten. Go with Jacob, she said softly. Stay hidden until nightfall. He'll make sure you get safely back to your people. As Jacob led Mourning Dove and her infant out the back door, Ellie set about erasing all evidence of their presence. She buried the used poultices in her garden, scattered the ashes from the medicinal preparations in the fireplace, and tucked the small wooden cradleboard beneath a loose floorboard under her bed. By the time she heard the approaching horses, the cabin appeared as it always did. Neat, organized, with no hint that anyone but Ellie had been there. She stepped onto her porch just as Thornton and his deputies crested the small rise leading to her property. The morning sun glinted off their badges and the barrels of their rifles. Behind them rode Dr. Harrison and, to Ellie's surprise, Martha Wilkins perched primly on her buggy seat. Quite the welcoming committee, Ellie remarked as they drew near. Had I known you were coming, I'd have put coffee on. Thornton dismounted, his movements stiff with barely contained anger. Where are they? He demanded without preamble. Where are who, Marshal? Ellie replied, crossing her arms. Don't play games with me, woman. We have reports that a Comanche woman and child were seen heading this way yesterday evening. Ellie raised an eyebrow. And who reported this? Jed Miller saw them while checking his traps, one of the deputies volunteered, earning a sharp glance from Thornton. Jed Miller drinks so much whiskey he sees dancing bears in his cornfield, Ellie observed dryly. Hardly a reliable witness. Nevertheless, Thornton pressed, we're here to search the premises. Again? You searched yesterday and found nothing, and today we'll search more thoroughly. He gestured to his deputies, who began to fan out around the cabin. Every inch of this property, gentlemen. Leave no stone unturned. As the men disappeared to begin their search, Dr. Harrison approached, his expression smug. You've gone too far this time, Eleanor, he said in a low voice. Harboring a Comanche warrior was bad enough. Add a woman and child to the mix and people might start thinking you've switched sides entirely. The only side I'm on is that of basic human decency, Ellie retorted. Something seemingly in short supply in Cottonwood Springs these days. Martha Wilkins sniffed disapprovingly from her perch on the buggy. Decency? Is that what you call consorting with savages? I call treating the sick and injured decency, regardless of who they are, Ellie replied evenly, as any true Christian would. The barb found its mark. Martha's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to deliver what would undoubtedly be a scathing reply. But Thornton's return interrupted her. The cabin's clear, he reported grudgingly, but there are fresh tracks leading to the ravine. He fixed Ellie with a hard stare. Care to explain that? I gather herbs along the ravine, she answered, meeting his gaze without flinching, as I have done for years. These aren't your tracks, Thornton countered. Too small. A woman's, I'd say, and there are marks that could be from a cradleboard being dragged alongside. Ellie's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. I can't explain every mark on my property, Marshal. Wildlife comes through regularly. Maybe what you're seeing are deer tracks. Miller was clear about what he saw, Thornton insisted. A Comanche woman carrying a child heading straight for your cabin at dusk yesterday. And as I said, Jed, Miller's eyesight is about as reliable as his sobriety. Thornton stepped closer, invading her personal space in a deliberate attempt to intimidate. "Where were you last night, Miss Montgomery?" "At the Medicine Rock," she replied truthfully. "Certain herbs need to be harvested under the waning moon." She gestured to the basket by her door, filled with various plants she had indeed gathered the day before. "Can anyone confirm that?" Ellie hesitated, weighing her options. Jacob could verify her story. He had found her at the Medicine Rock, but bringing him into this would only place him under suspicion as well. "I work alone, Marshal," she said finally, "as you well know." Thornton's eyes narrowed. Convenient. Dr. Harrison had been examining the contents of Ellie's herb basket with ill-disguised contempt. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a small bundle of dried leaves. "Doesn't look like any medicinal herb I'm familiar with." "Comanche healing plant." Thornton identified it before Ellie could respond. "My father fought them for 20 years, learned to recognize some of their ways." He took the bundle from Harrison, twirling it between his fingers. "Used for fever, particularly in children. Isn't that right, Miss Montgomery?" Ellie maintained, her composure despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "It's called skull cap," she acknowledged. "And yes, it's effective for fevers. I've used it successfully with several children in town, including your nephew last winter, Marshal Thornton." The reminder that his sister's child might have died without Ellie's intervention didn't soften Thornton's expression. "The town meeting is set for noon today," he announced. "I suggest you attend, Miss Montgomery. The citizens of Cottonwood Springs have some questions about your loyalties." "Am I under arrest?" Ellie asked directly. Thornton's mouth twisted. "Not yet, but stay on your property until the meeting. That's an order." After they departed, Ellie sank onto her porch steps, trembling slightly as the tension of the confrontation ebbed. She had bought time for Morning Dove and Little Thunder, but at what cost? The town meeting would be a formality. Most had already decided she was guilty. Of what crime exactly seemed irrelevant. Helping Indians was enough. Exhaustion pulled at her, the sleepless night catching up now that the immediate danger had passed. But she couldn't rest yet. She needed to prepare for the meeting, to figure out what she would say in her defense. And more importantly, she needed to ensure Morning Dove and Little Thunder had a way back to their people. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Ellie used the time to put her affairs in order, packing essential medicines and personal items into a small trunk, just in case. She wasn't planning to flee, but neither was she naive enough to believe that the town meeting would end in her favor. By mid-morning, the heat had grown oppressive, the air thick with humidity that promised a storm later. Ellie changed into her best dress, a simple blue calico with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her graying hair into a neat bun. If she was to face judgment, she would do so with dignity. The walk into town was solitary and tense. Ellie could feel eyes watching from windows as she passed, curtains twitching closed when she looked their way. Children who normally called greetings were hurried inside by anxious mothers. By the time she reached the town hall, a heavy silence had descended, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. The hall was packed when she entered, every bench filled, with additional townsfolk standing along the walls. A space cleared around her as she moved toward the front, as if her mere presence might contaminate those nearby. Thornton stood beside the mayor's podium, arms crossed, expression triumphant. Dr. Harrison sat in the front row next to Martha Wilkins and the other members of the Ladies' Aid Society. Ellie scanned the crowd for a friendly face and found Jacob Wilson near the back, his expression grim but supportive. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. At least one person hadn't abandoned her. Mayor Henry Caldwell, a portly man with thinning hair and a perpetually harried expression, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "Citizens of Cottonwood Springs," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "We are gathered today to address a matter of grave concern to our community. It has been brought to our attention that one among us may have been engaging in activities contrary to the safety and welfare of this town." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ellie stood straight-backed, hands clasped before her, face composed despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Marshal Thornton, if you would present the evidence," the mayor continued, stepping aside to give Thornton the floor. Thornton moved to the podium with the swagger of a man who believed victory was already his. "Thank you, Mayor Caldwell. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past several days, I have been investigating disturbing reports concerning Miss Eleanor Montgomery." He proceeded to lay out his case methodically. The blood-stained sheets found in her cabin, the Comanche healing herbs, the tracks leading to her property, Jed Miller's sighting of the Comanche woman and child. He embellished liberally, transforming circumstantial evidence into damning proof, playing on the townspeople's fears of Indian raids and massacres. But most concerning, Thornton concluded, is the growing body of evidence suggesting that Miss Montgomery has been in communication with Rising Thunder himself, the same Comanche chief suspected in the raid that killed the Miller family this spring. This unleashed a fresh wave of muttering, darker in tone. Ellie felt the mood of the room shifting, fear and anger crystallizing into a tangible force directed at her. "What does the accused have to say in her defense?" Mayor Caldwell asked, not quite meeting Ellie's eyes. Ellie moved to the podium, acutely aware of every hostile gaze following her progress. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the sound abnormally loud in the tense silence. "I stand before you not as the accused, but as the same woman who has delivered your babies, set your broken bones, and tended your fevers for the past decade," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I have never turned away anyone who needed my help, man, woman, or child, white, black, or Indian." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across familiar faces, faces that now regarded her with suspicion and hostility. "Marshal Thornton suggests that this makes me a traitor. I suggest it makes me a healer. When I took up medicine during the war, I swore an oath to do no harm and to ease suffering wherever I found it. I have kept that oath, even when it was difficult, even when it was dangerous." Martha Wilkins rose from her seat, her thin face pinched with indignation. "Are you admitting, then, that you treated Rising Thunder? That you harbored a Comanche woman and child in your home?" Ellie met the woman's accusatory stare directly. "I am saying that I will treat anyone who comes to me in need. Would you have me turn away a sick child, Mrs. Wilkins? Would that align with the Christian charity your Ladies' Aid Society claims to uphold?" Color flooded Martha's cheeks, but before she could respond, a man's voice called from the back of the hall. "My boy would be dead if not for Miss Montgomery." Heads turned to see Robert Fletcher on his feet, his weathered farmer's face set in stubborn lines. "When Tommy was bit by that rattler last summer, Dr. Harrison here said there was nothing to be done. He jabbed a finger in the physician's direction, said my boy would lose his leg or worse. Miss Montgomery saved him, saved his life and his limb." "That's different," someone countered. "Tommy's one of us." "And what of Sarah? Peterson's twins?" Another voice added. "Born too early, both of them blue as slate. Miss Montgomery sat with them day and night for a week. They're healthy 5-year-olds now." The meeting dissolved into competing voices, some defending Ellie, others condemning her. Mayor Caldwell pounded his gavel ineffectively, trying to restore order. Through the chaos, Ellie noticed Jacob Wilson slip out the back door of the hall. Her heart sank. Had even he abandoned her now? But there was no time to dwell on it. Thornton had reclaimed the podium and was shouting for silence. "Enough!" he roared when the noise finally subsided. "Miss Montgomery's past services to this town are not in question. What matters is where her loyalties lie now. He turned to face Ellie directly, his expression hard with accusation. "Tell us plainly, Miss Montgomery, did you or did you not treat Rising Thunder for Snakebite 4 days ago?" A hush fell over the hall. Every eye turned to Ellie, awaiting her answer. A simple denial might save her. Thornton had suspicions, but no irrefutable proof. But a lie would betray everything she stood for. "I treated a man who was dying," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silence. "I did not ask his name or his tribe before deciding whether his life was worth saving." Gasps and mutters erupted. Thornton's face darkened with triumph. "And the woman and child? Did you harbor them as well?" Ellie lifted her chin. "I have never turned away anyone seeking healing. Not you, Marshal Thornton, when you broke your arm falling from that horse 2 winters back. Not Dr. Harrison's wife, when childbed fever nearly took her. And not a mother with a sick infant, regardless of the color of her skin." The hall erupted again, angry voices calling for punishment, exile, even arrest. Thornton raised his hand for silence, a malicious smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe we've heard enough," he announced. "Mayor Caldwell, I move that this town vote immediately on whether Eleanor Montgomery should be permitted to remain in Cottonwood Springs." Before the mayor could respond, the back doors of the hall burst open with a bang that momentarily silenced the crowd. Jacob Wilson strode in, his expression grim and purposeful. Behind him came a tall, broad-shouldered Comanche warrior, dressed in buckskins with a single eagle feather in his hair. Rising Thunder. Ellie's heart seemed to stop. What was he doing here? He should be with his people, safe from Thornton and his deputies. Instead, he had walked directly into the viper's nest. The hall exploded into pandemonium. Women screamed, men shouted, some reaching for weapons. Thornton drew his pistol, aiming it squarely at Rising Thunder's chest. "Hold!" Jacob's voice cut through the chaos. "He comes in peace. Look at his hands." Indeed, Rising Thunder's hands were raised, palms forward, showing he carried no weapons. His face remained impassive, dignified despite the hostility surrounding him. "This is outrageous," Thornton bellowed. "Wilson, step aside. That man is wanted for murder." "He has come to speak," Jacob replied steadily, "and by God you will hear him out." Mayor Caldwell, pale and trembling, found his voice. "Marshal Thornton, please lower your weapon if he has come peacefully." "He's a murderer," Thornton insisted, but the mayor's words had introduced a note of uncertainty. The crowd, while still agitated, seemed torn between fear and curiosity. "Let him speak," someone called from the back. "Shoot him," shouted another. Rising Thunder remained motionless, his dark eyes surveying the hostile crowd without flinching. Then, slowly and deliberately, he began to walk down the central aisle, toward the podium. The crowd parted before him like water, no one quite brave enough to block his path. Ellie watched in stunned silence as he approached. He moved with the fluid grace of a natural hunter, seemingly unconcerned by Thornton's pistol still trained on his heart. As he passed her, their eyes met briefly. An almost imperceptible nod was his only acknowledgement. He stopped before the podium, facing the crowd rather than turning his back to them. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "I am Rising Thunder, Chief of the Southern Comanche," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. "I come to speak truth about this woman." He gestured toward Ellie, "and about the killings you blame on my people." Thornton stepped forward, pistol still aimed at the chief. "We don't need your truth, Indian. We know what happened to the Miller family." Rising Thunder's gaze shifted to Thornton, his expression unchanged. "Do you, or do you know only what you wish to believe?" From his belt, he withdrew a silver pocket watch, holding it up for all to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd as recognition dawned on some faces. It was Sheriff Miller's watch, distinctive for the engraving of a lone star on its cover. "This belonged to the father," Rising Thunder continued, "taken not by my warriors, but by men who wished you to blame us." He tossed the watch to Mayor Caldwell, who caught it reflexively. "Look inside." With trembling fingers, the mayor opened the watch. A folded piece of paper fell out, which he carefully unfolded and read. The color drained from his face. "It's a deed," he announced, voice shaking, "to the Miller property, signed over to..." He looked up, eyes wide with shock. "To the Thornton Mining Company." All eyes turned to Marshal Thornton, whose face had gone as pale as the mayor's. The pistol in his hand wavered. "That's a forgery," he spat. "A trick." "Compare the signature to others John Miller made," Rising Thunder suggested, calmly. "The truth will show itself." "This is absurd," Thornton blustered. But there was a note of desperation in his voice now. "You expect us to believe the word of a savage over one of our own." "I expect nothing," Rising Thunder replied. "But this woman," he gestured again, to Ellie, "she saved my life when your poison was in my blood. She protected my wife and son when your men hunted them. She has earned the respect of my people. Has she not earned the respect of yours?" A heavy silence fell over the hall as the implications of his words and the watch sank in. If Rising Thunder was telling the truth, if the Miller family had been killed not by Comanche raiders, but by white men seeking their land. "Marshal Thornton," Mayor Caldwell said slowly, "is there a Thornton Mining Company?" "This is ridiculous," Thornton snarled. "Are you taking the word of an Indian over mine? I've protected this town for 15 years. That ain't an answer." "Wade," Robert Fletcher observed, moving to stand beside Jacob Wilson. Other men followed suit, forming a loose semicircle between Thornton and Rising Thunder. Cornered, Thornton's composure cracked. With a wordless cry of rage, he swung his pistol away from Rising Thunder and aimed it directly at Ellie. "This is your doing," he hissed. "You turned them against me." Before anyone could react, Rising Thunder moved with the speed of a striking snake. His hand closed around Thornton's wrist, twisting until the pistol clattered to the floor. In the same fluid motion, he swept the marshal's legs from under him, sending him crashing to the floorboards. "Enough blood has been spilled," the chief said quietly. Two of the deputies rushed forward, not to assist Thornton, but to restrain him. The evidence might be circumstantial, but the marshal's reaction and his failure to deny the existence of the mining company spoke volumes. As Thornton was led away, shouting threats and accusations, the mood in the hall slowly shifted. Shock gave way to murmured conversations, sidelong glances at Ellie, uncertain nods in Rising Thunder's direction. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat. "I believe," he announced, "that this meeting is adjourned until we can sort through these developments." People began to file out, many casting curious looks at the unlikely trio who remained near the podium, Ellie, Jacob, and Rising Thunder. Some nodded respectfully to Ellie. A few even murmured apologies. Others maintained their distance, still uncertain what to make of recent events. When the hall had emptied, Rising Thunder turned to Ellie. "My wife, my son. Safe," she assured him, "at Jacob's shelter. Little Thunder's fever broke this morning. He'll make a full recovery." Relief softened the chief's stoic features momentarily. "You have the gratitude of my people," he said, "and my personal debt." "There is no debt," Ellie replied. "I did only what any healer would do." Rising Thunder's expression suggested he knew better, that few would have risked what she had. "For a man considered an enemy," Jacob cleared his throat. "We should get you to your family," he told Rising Thunder, "and then find a way to get you all safely back to your people." As they left the town hall, Ellie was struck by the strangeness of their small procession. A frontier woman, a rancher, and a Comanche chief walking side by side through the streets of Cottonwood Springs. Some townsfolk stared from a distance, but none approached or challenged them. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke as they reached the outskirts of town. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching them within moments. But Ellie welcomed it. It felt cleansing, washing away the tension and fear of recent days. They took shelter beneath a stand of cottonwoods, watching the curtain of rain transform the dusty landscape. "Your people?" Ellie asked Rising Thunder. "Where are they?" "Nearby," he replied, "waiting." "Waiting for what?" A smile touched his lips. "For the sign that it is time to come." Before she could ask what he meant, Jacob pointed to a distant ridge. "Look there." Through the rain, Ellie could just make out mounted figures on the horizon. Comanche warriors, dozens of them, their painted horses vivid against the stormy sky. "My people come," Rising Thunder said simply, "to honor the woman who saved their chief." As Ellie watched, more warriors appeared until the ridge was lined with them, 80 or more, their presence both magnificent and terrifying. Lightning split the sky behind them, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to make the very earth vibrate beneath her feet. In that moment, standing between worlds, Eleanor Montgomery understood that her life would never be the same again. Many stars stepped forward, a small clay pot in her hands. She dipped her fingers into some kind of red ochre paste and began to draw symbols on Ellie's forehead and cheeks. Each mark was made with deliberate care, accompanied by soft words in Comanche that sounded like prayer or blessing. "These are sacred marks," many stars explained as she worked. "Marks of healer, of wisdom keeper, of one who walks between worlds. They will fade from skin but remain always in spirit." When she finished, White Eagle presented Ellie with a medicine bundle, a small leather pouch decorated with porcupine quills and containing objects she couldn't see but could feel through the soft leather. Stones, perhaps, and what might have been small bones or carved fetishes. "Carry this always," he instructed. "It holds power of ancestors, protects you on healing path." Rising Thunder stepped forward next, holding something that gleamed golden in the firelight. A necklace of polished amber beads interspersed with tiny shells and what appeared to be bear claws. "This belonged to Old Willow," he said as he placed it around Ellie's neck. "For 7 generations, it passed from one medicine woman to next. Now it comes to you." The weight of the necklace against her collarbone felt significant, a physical manifestation of the responsibility she was accepting. Ellie touched it reverently, aware of the history it carried and humbled by the trust it represented. "I will try to be worthy of it," she said softly. White Eagle nodded approvingly. "Now you receive your Comanche name. In dreams, I see what you will be called." He spoke a phrase in Comanche that sounded musical to Ellie's ears, but held no meaning for her. "In your tongue," he translated, "it means woman who speaks with plants. This is your name now among the people. Woman who speaks with plants." It was eerily fitting, almost as if White Eagle truly had glimpsed something essential about her in his dreams. Ellie had always felt a connection to the plants she used in her healing work, often talking to them as she gathered or prepared them, thanking them for their medicine. "I am honored by this name," she said, the words feeling inadequate for the emotion welling within her. Many stars smiled, the firelight deepening the lines on her face into a map of a long, full life. "Now you are truly of the people," she declared. "No longer Eleanor Montgomery. You are woman who speaks with plants, daughter of Comanche, keeper of medicine wisdom." At her words, a great shout went up from the assembled tribe members. Drums began again, faster now, joined by rattles and flutes. Warriors stepped forward to dance around the fire, their movements telling stories Ellie couldn't yet interpret, but found mesmerizing nonetheless. Women's voices rose in songs that seemed to reach back through countless generations, connecting this moment to all that had come before. Morning Dove appeared at Ellie's side, Little Thunder sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the noise and excitement. "Now we are sisters," she said simply, taking Ellie's hand in her free one. The words brought unexpected tears to Ellie's eyes. Sisters, family, belonging. These were things she had not truly experienced since leaving her home in Pennsylvania to become a war nurse 15 years ago. The path that had led her here, to this moment, this place, these people, had been long and often painful, marked by loss and hardship. Yet somehow, improbably, it had delivered her to a new beginning among those who valued her skills and saw her worth. As the celebration continued around her, Ellie found herself watching the faces illuminated by firelight, the dignified elders, the proud warriors, the laughing children, the women whose strength and resilience were evident in every movement. These were her people now. This unlikely family, born not of blood but of choice and circumstance, would be her future. The realization was both terrifying and profoundly comforting. She was no longer alone. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of new experiences as Ellie, or Woman Who Speaks with Plants, as she was now called, began to adapt to life among the Comanche. Each morning brought fresh challenges and discoveries, from learning the basics of the language to understanding the complex social structure of the tribe. Many stars proved to be a patient teacher, guiding Ellie through the intricacies of Comanche medicine traditions. The old woman's knowledge was vast and deeply rooted in spiritual understanding that sometimes challenged Ellie's more scientific training. Yet she found that the two approaches often complemented rather than contradicted each other. Western medicine explaining how, traditional healing understanding why. Plants speak if you listen, many stars instructed as they gathered medicines. In the hills surrounding the camp, not with words like people but with signs, color, shape where they grow, all tell you their purpose. Ellie nodded, kneeling to examine a cluster of small purple flowers. In my medical books, this is called echinacea. We use it for infections to strengthen the body's ability to fight disease. Many stars smiled approvingly. We call it strong medicine, use for same purpose. See, different words, same wisdom. Such moments of connection across the divide of their different traditions became increasingly common. Ellie found that, while the language and methods might differ, the fundamental purpose of healing remained constant, to ease suffering and restore balance to body and spirit. Her first real test as the tribe's new healer came when a hunting party returned with a young warrior who had been gored by a buffalo. The injury was serious, a deep puncture wound to the abdomen that would certainly prove fatal without intervention. The wounded man was brought to Ellie's tipi, which had been expanded and refitted to serve as both her living quarters and a healing space. Many stars accompanied the bearers, her face grave. "This beyond our medicine," she admitted as they laid the unconscious warrior on a pallet of furs. In old days, he would journey to spirit world before next sun. Ellie examined the wound carefully, her mind already calculating what needed to be done. The buffalo's horn had penetrated the abdominal wall, but appeared to have missed vital organs. A lucky chance that gave the young man a fighting chance if infection could be prevented. "I need to close this wound internally," she explained to many stars. "With my needles and thread, I can repair the damage inside before closing." "The outer wound?" The elder woman's eyes widened slightly. "You put hands inside body? This powerful medicine?" "It's a surgical technique," Ellie clarified. "I learned it during the war, treating soldiers with similar injuries." Many stars considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Do what you must. I will prepare purifying smoke and singing to help his spirit stay while you work." Together, they formed an unlikely surgical team. Ellie working with her medical instruments and antiseptic solutions, many stars providing spiritual support through rituals and chants that kept the young warrior's family calm and focused there. Collective energy on healing. The procedure was challenging under such primitive conditions, but Ellie's wartime experience served her well. Hours later, exhausted but satisfied, she tied off the final suture and straightened her aching back. "Now we wait," she told the anxious family gathered outside the teepee. "I've done what I can. The rest depends on his strength and the will of the spirits." To her relief, the young warrior survived the critical first days when infection posed the greatest threat. His recovery was slow but steady, and within 2 weeks he was able to sit up and take nourishment on his own. By the month's end, he had rejoined tribal life, though he would not hunt again until his strength fully returned. The successful treatment elevated Ellie's status within the tribe significantly. Warriors who had been skeptical of the white woman's medicine now nodded respectfully when she passed. Mothers brought their children to her not just for serious illness, but for minor complaints they might previously have treated themselves. Even the most traditional elders began to acknowledge that her skills had value alongside their ancient healing ways. Rising Thunder visited her teepee one evening as she was organizing her dwindling supply of surgical thread. Little Thunder, now thriving and plump-cheeked, gurgled happily in his cradleboard nearby. "My son grows strong," the chief observed, pride evident in his voice as he touched the infant's cheek, "thanks to your medicine." "He's a fighter," Ellie replied, smiling at the baby's antics, "like his father." "My people talk of you," Rising Thunder continued, settling cross-legged beside the small fire that burned at the center of the teepee. "They say spirits guided you to us, that you were meant to be Comanche healer." "And what do you say?" Ellie asked, curious about his perspective. A rare smile softened his typically stoic expression. "I say you saved my life when you could have let me die. Saved my son when others failed. What you call this choice, I call destiny." The simple statement touched something deep within Ellie. She had not thought of her actions in terms of destiny or divine guidance. She had simply done what any healer would do when faced with suffering, yet perhaps there was something larger at work, something beyond her understanding that had led her along this unlikely path. "I'm grateful to have found a place here," she said finally, "though I still have much to learn." Rising Thunder nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Winter comes soon. Snow will close passes, no travel until spring." He met her gaze directly. "You are certain this is path you choose? Once winter comes, you cannot return to White World until thaw." The question gave Ellie pause, though not because she harbored doubts about staying. Rather, she realized that she had not thought of returning to the White World at all in recent weeks. Her former life in Cottonwood Springs already seemed distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. "This is my path," she confirmed, "for as long as your people will have me." "Then there is something you should know," Rising Thunder said, his voice lowering. "White soldiers press closer to our territory each moon. New fort being built 2 days' ride east. They say they want peace, but bring many guns." Ellie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She had been so absorbed in adapting to Comanche life that she had almost forgotten the larger forces at work in the world beyond their hidden valley. The inexorable westward expansion that threatened all native peoples, regardless of whether they sought conflict or peace. "Do you think they'll come here?" she asked. Rising Thunder's face was impassive, but his eyes held a shadow of concern. "Not before winter, but after." He shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its restraint. "White man always wants more land. What will you do?" "What I must to protect my people." He studied her intently. "Having you among us may help. White woman living willingly with Comanche, this is things soldiers and Indian agents do not expect. You could speak for us if time comes." The responsibility implicit in his words was enormous. Ellie might someday find herself acting as a bridge between worlds, an interpreter not just of language but of intentions and values. The prospect was daunting, but she couldn't deny the logic. Her presence in the tribe was unusual enough to potentially influence how white authorities approached them. "I will do whatever I can," she promised, "though I'm not sure how much influence I would have with military commanders." "More than you think, perhaps," Rising Thunder replied cryptically, "but that is concern for spring. Now we prepare for winter." The preparations were already well underway. Each day, hunting parties returned with game that the women butchered and preserved through smoking or drying. Berries and wild fruits were gathered and stored, nuts and roots collected and cached. The entire tribe worked with focused efficiency, their movements guided by ancient patterns of survival refined over countless generations. Ellie found herself drawn into these activities, learning not just the medicine ways of the Comanche but their domestic skills as well. Morning Dove taught her to scrape and tan hides, a laborious process that left Ellie's arms aching but produced leather of remarkable softness and durability. Many Stars showed her how to weave watertight baskets from river reeds and how to make pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat and berries that would sustain the tribe through lean times. "Medicine woman must know all things," the elderly mentor explained when Ellie expressed surprise at the breadth of knowledge expected of her. How to heal body, yes, but also how to feed people, clothe people, help people survive, all connected. It was a holistic approach to healing that expanded Ellie's understanding of her role. She was not merely a doctor treating physical ailments, but a keeper of wisdom that touched every aspect of tribal life. The responsibility was enormous, but also deeply fulfilling, in a way her previous practice had never been. As the days shortened, and the air grew crisp with the promise of approaching winter, Ellie found herself thinking of Jacob Wilson with increasing frequency. Had he faced censure from the townspeople for helping her? Was he weathering the coming winter alone on his ranch? She wished there was some way to send word to him, to let him know that she was safe and had found a place of belonging among the Comanche. One morning, as the first light frost silvered the grass around the camp, White Eagle sought her out as she was gathering kindling for her fire. "Dreams came to me last night," he announced without preamble. "Strong dreams of white man on painted horse." Ellie paused in her task, arms full of small branches. "What man?" "The one who helped you, who brought Rising Thunder to town meeting." White Eagle's gaze was distant, as if still half in the dream world. "He rides this way, alone." "Jacob, coming here?" The very idea seemed impossible. How would he even find the hidden valley? And why would he undertake such a journey as winter approached? "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to keep the surge of emotion from her voice. White Eagle fixed her with a look that made her flush with embarrassment at questioning his vision. "Dreams do not lie," he said simply. "He comes soon." The news disturbed Ellie's usual calm. She found herself distracted during her morning consultations with tribal members, her gaze drifting repeatedly to the valley entrance where sentries kept watch. The thought of seeing Jacob again, of connecting, however briefly, with her old life, filled her with a confusing mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What would he think of her now, dressed in Comanche clothing, her hair in braids adorned with beads, her speech increasingly peppered with Comanche words? Would he see her as a traitor to her race, as so many in Cottonwood Springs undoubtedly did? Or would he understand the path that had led her here? By midday, Ellie could no longer contain her restless energy. She approached Rising Thunder, who was supervising the construction of reinforced winter tipis. "White Eagle says Jacob Wilson may be coming here," she said without preliminary. "Is this possible?" The chief considered her words. My scouts reported lone rider 3 days ago, at edge of territory. They did not approach, but watched. Could be this man. If it is him, Ellie pressed, will he be allowed into the camp? Rising Thunder's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. He brought me to town when others would have shot me on sight. For this, he has my respect. He paused. But camp's location must remain secret. If he comes, he will be blindfolded before final approach. It was a reasonable precaution, though Ellie doubted Jacob would ever betray the Comanche's location, even under duress. He was a man who understood the value of privacy and the right of all people to determine their own destinies. "Thank you," she said simply. 2 more days passed with no sign of any visitor. Ellie had almost convinced herself that White Eagle's dream had been just that, a dream, not a prophecy, when a commotion at the edge of camp caught her attention late one afternoon. A small group of warriors was returning, and in their midst rode a man on a paint horse, a white man whose broad-shouldered silhouette was instantly familiar to Ellie even at a distance. Jacob. She set aside the herbs she had been sorting and rose to her feet, heart pounding with unexpected force. For a moment she hesitated, uncertain whether to go to him immediately or wait for Rising Thunder's formal welcome. Protocol among the Comanche was important, and as one of them now, she was expected to observe their ways. Before she could decide, many stars appeared at her elbow. "Go," the old woman said with a knowing smile. "He comes far to see you. Do not make him wait." Permission granted, Ellie moved swiftly through the camp, conscious of curious eyes following her progress. As she drew closer to the returning party, she could see that Jacob did indeed wear a blindfold, though it was being removed now that they had entered the camp proper. He blinked in the late afternoon sunlight, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with obvious wonderment. When his gaze found Ellie, his weathered face transformed with a smile of such genuine pleasure that her remaining uncertainties melted away. "Jacob," she called, closing the distance between them. He dismounted somewhat stiffly. The journey had clearly been arduous, but his embrace when she reached him was strong and sure. The familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and something indefinably Jacob, brought a rush of memories that momentarily disoriented her. "Look at you," he said when they separated, his eyes taking in her transformation. "You look different," she supplied when he hesitated. "Alive," he corrected. "More alive than I've ever seen you." The observation was so unexpected and so accurate that Ellie felt tears spring to her eyes. She was more alive here, among people who valued her skills without questioning her right to use them, who saw her age as a mark of accumulated wisdom rather than diminished worth. "What are you doing here?" she asked, blinking back the uncharacteristic tears. "How did you even find this place?" Jacob's expression sobered. "I need to speak with you and with Rising Thunder. There's trouble coming, Ellie, serious trouble." Before he could elaborate, Rising Thunder approached, his face composed in the formal mask he wore for official interactions. "Jacob Wilson," he greeted the rancher. "You travel far to reach us." Jacob nodded respectfully. "I have news that couldn't wait for spring." "Then we will hear it," the chief decided. "Come to Council Tipi when you have rested." As Rising Thunder walked away, Jacob turned back to Ellie, his expression troubled. "Things have gotten worse. In Cottonwood Springs since you left. Thornton escaped custody, killed a deputy in the process." "Escaped?" Ellie echoed, a chill of foreboding washing over her. "Where did he go?" "That's the worst of it," Jacob replied grimly. "He headed straight for Fort Richardson, spouting tales about a white woman held captive by Comanches. Claims you're being held against your will, possibly." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, possibly subjected to unspeakable treatment. The implication was clear. and rage flared hot in Ellie's chest. "That's absurd. I chose to come here. I'm respected, honored even." "You and I know that," Jacob agreed, placing a calming hand on her arm. "But the army doesn't, and Thornton's story plays right into their worst prejudices about Indians. Colonel Mackenzie is using it as justification to launch a winter campaign, supposedly to rescue you, but really to clear Comanches from these hills once and for all." The news was devastating. Ellie had known conflict with white settlers was an ever-present threat to the tribe, but she had believed the winter would at least grant them a reprieve. Now, it seemed her very presence, far from being the protection Rising Thunder had hoped, might become the catalyst for destruction. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Not much," Jacob admitted. "A week, maybe 2 at most. Mackenzie's gathering supplies and men, but he won't wait long. He wants to catch the Comanche off. God, strike before a full winter sets in." Ellie closed her eyes briefly, centering herself as many stars had taught her to do in moments of crisis. When she opened them again, determination had replaced the initial shock. "Then we have work to do," she said firmly. "Come, you need to tell Rising Thunder and the council everything you know." The council tipi was the largest in the camp, its interior spacious enough to accommodate the dozen men who comprised the tribe's leadership. Ellie had been inside only once before, during her adoption ceremony, and the solemnity of the space still impressed her. Central fire pit, carefully tended, walls adorned with shields and weapons representing the lineages of the various leaders. Seating arranged according to a hierarchy she was still learning to understand. As a woman, even one with the status of medicine keeper, she would not normally be included in such a gathering. But her unique position as both Comanche and white gave her special standing in this instance. Rising Thunder himself had requested her presence. Jacob told his story concisely, detailing what he knew of Thornton's escape and subsequent actions. The marshal had apparently changed his story several times, first claiming that Ellie had been kidnapped during the confrontation at the town hall, then later suggesting she had been taken weeks earlier and that the woman who appeared at the meeting was an imposter. "Most folks in town know it's nonsense," Jacob explained. "They saw Ellie leave willingly, but Thornton found willing ears at the fort. Colonel Mackenzie's been looking for an excuse to push into Comanche territory for months." "How many soldiers?" Rising Thunder asked, his face impassive despite the dire news. "3 companies at least," Jacob replied, "plus scouts and artillery. They're bringing mountain howitzers, small cannons that can be transported by mule." A murmur ran through the assembled leaders. Even those who didn't speak English understood the threat posed by artillery. One of the older warriors spoke rapidly in Comanche, gesturing emphatically. White Eagle translated for Jacob's benefit. "He asks if soldiers know location of our winter camp." Jacob shook his head. "I don't think so, but they have Tonkawa scouts. If anyone can find this valley, they can." Another grim reality. The Tonkawa tribe had a long-standing alliance with white settlers and were renowned for their tracking abilities. What's more, generations of conflict with the Comanche made them eager to assist in any campaign against their traditional enemies. "We must move camp," one of the younger leaders suggested. "Go deeper into hills where soldiers cannot follow." "With children, elders, in beginning of winter," an older man countered. "Many would not survive journey." The debate continued, voices rising as various options were presented and rejected. Fight, flee, split the tribe, send warriors to confront the soldiers while others escaped with the vulnerable. Each possibility carried its own dangers. Throughout it all, Rising Thunder listened silently, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Only when a lull fell in the discussion did he finally speak. "What would happen?" he asked, looking directly at Ellie. if you went to soldiers voluntarily. Told them you are here by choice? All eyes turned to her, awaiting her response. Ellie considered the question carefully before answering. It might help, she acknowledged, if I could speak directly to Colonel Mackenzie, explain the situation. But Thornton would try to discredit me. He'd claim I've been brainwashed, or that I'm speaking under duress. And if you brought proof, Rising Thunder pressed, proof that Thornton lied about Miller family killings? Jacob leaned forward, interest kindling in his eyes. What kind of proof? After council meeting in town, I send warriors to watch Thornton's movements, the chief explained. They follow him to cave in North Hills. Find many things there. Whiskey, stolen goods. He paused significantly, and clothing with blood, white woman's dress, child's shirt, all kept as trophies. Ellie felt ill at the implication. You think Thornton himself killed the Miller family? Or paid others to do it, Rising Thunder confirmed. Either way, his hands are red with their blood. The revelation cast the Marshal's persecution of the Comanche and of Ellie herself in an even more sinister light. He hadn't just been a prejudiced lawman, he'd been actively creating conflicts that could be blamed on Indians to further his own agenda. If we had those items, Jacob said slowly, and if Ellie brought them to Fort Richardson, it might be enough to make Mackenzie hesitate, at least long enough for a proper investigation. It's risky, Ellie cautioned. Thornton is desperate, now a fugitive with nothing to lose. If I appear with evidence against him, he might try to silence me permanently. You would not go alone, Rising Thunder stated. Jacob Wilson would accompany you, and 2 of my most trusted warriors, dressed as peaceful delegates. The plan was audacious, even dangerous. But as the council continued to debate alternatives, Ellie saw that it might be the only way to prevent all-out war. If she could convince Colonel Mackenzie that she was not a captive, and if she could cast enough doubt on Thornton's character and motives, perhaps the immediate threat could be averted. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice cutting through the ongoing discussion. I'll go to Fort Richardson and speak with Colonel Mackenzie. A hushed tension fell over the council. Teepee. White Eagle regarded her with solemn intensity. You understand danger? He asked. If you fail, you may never return to us, and we may not survive winter. I understand, Ellie confirmed, the weight of responsibility settling over her like a physical burden. But I can't sit by and watch your people, my people now, suffer because of lies told about me. Rising Thunder nodded once, decision made. Then it is settled. Tomorrow at first light, you and Jacob Wilson will ride for Fort Richardson, with 2 wolves and Running Fox as escorts. He surveyed the assembled leaders. Tonight, we prepare. Make medicine for safe journey. Creator willing, we will see moon change again in peace. And as the council dispersed, Jacob caught Ellie's arm, holding her back until they were alone, save for Rising Thunder. Are you sure about this? He asked, concern evident in his eyes. Once we're at the fort, I can't guarantee your safety, or that they'll even listen before acting. I'm sure, Ellie replied with more confidence than she felt. What choice do we have? I won't have blood shed in my name, especially not the blood of people who took me in when my own kind cast me out. Jacob studied her face for a long moment. You've changed, he observed quietly. Have I? You always had courage, he clarified. But now you have purpose. It suits you. The simple observation touched Ellie deeply. Jacob had always seen her clearly, perhaps more clearly than she saw herself. Even now, when her path had diverged so dramatically from anything they might have imagined, he understood the transformation she was undergoing. Thank you for coming, she said softly, for risking so much to warn us. He shrugged, a gesture that downplayed the danger he had faced traveling alone through territory where a white man might easily be killed on sight. couldn't let you face this blindly. Besides, he added with a crooked smile, I promised I'd see you again. Rising Thunder, who had been listening silently to their exchange, spoke. Jacob Wilson has heart of warrior, though he wears no paint. He placed a hand briefly on the rancher's shoulder, a gesture of respect rarely offered to outsiders. You will both need rest before journey. Dawn comes quickly. Sleep, however, proved elusive for Ellie. She lay awake in her teepee, long after the camp had grown quiet, mind racing with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. What if Mackenzie refused to listen? What if Thornton's influence was too strong? What if she was detained at the fort, prevented from returning to warn the tribe? The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers, until she finally rose and stepped outside, seeking solace in the night air. The moon was waning, just past full, casting enough light to illuminate the sleeping camp. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from banked fires, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. This place had become home with a speed and completeness that still amazed her. These people, so different from those she had known all, her life in their customs and beliefs, yet so similar in their fundamental humanity, had become her family. The thought that her presence might bring destruction upon them was unbearable. Cannot sleep. The soft voice startled Ellie from her thoughts. Many stars stood nearby, wrapped in a fur robe against the night chill, her silver hair gleaming. In the moonlight. Too many thoughts, Ellie admitted. The elder nodded, understanding. Night before battle always hardest. Warriors say stomach feels like snake pit. Is that what tomorrow will be? A battle? All life is battle. Many stars replied philosophically. Battle to survive, battle to keep what matters, battle against fear. She regarded Ellie with eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. You fight good battle, woman who speaks with plants. Brave battle. I'm afraid, Ellie confessed. Afraid I'll fail, that my words won't be enough to protect our people. Fear is good companion if you make it walk behind you, the old woman said. Let it push you forward, not hold you back. She took Ellie's hand, her papery skin cool in the night air. I have something for journey, medicine to make words strong. From within her robe, she withdrew a small object wrapped in soft buckskin. Unwrapping it revealed a stone pendant, a piece of polished turquoise set in a silver bezel and suspended from a leather thong. Very old, Many Stars explained, came from ancestors in mountains far to west. Stone has power to make truth heard, even by those who do not wish to hear. Ellie accepted the pendant reverently, recognizing it as one Many Stars herself often wore during important ceremonies. I can't take this, she protested. It's too valuable. The old woman shook her head firmly. You go to speak truth that may save many lives. No better use for stone's power. She placed her hands on either side of Ellie's face, a gesture of blessing and affirmation. You are daughter of my heart now, Comanche woman with white skin. Remember this when you stand before soldiers. Tears pricked at Ellie's eyes, both from the gift itself and from the unconditional acceptance it represented. I'll remember, she promised. Good, Many Stars said simply. Now sleep. Journey needs clear mind, strong body. Despite the continuing weight of anxiety, Ellie found that she could indeed sleep after returning to her teepee. The pendant rested against her breastbone, a tangible reminder of all that was at stake and of all the unexpected gifts her new life had brought her. Dawn broke clear and cold, the eastern sky painted in streaks of pink and gold that belied the tension permeating the camp. Ellie dressed with care, choosing clothing that represented both aspects of her identity, the buckskin dress of a Comanche woman, but worn over the practical cotton undergarments of her former life. Many Stars' pendant hung visibly at her throat, and her silver-streaked hair was braided in the Comanche style, but left uncovered. Rising Thunder had organized supplies for the journey: food, water, additional ammunition for the rifles, Jacob. And the warriors carried the evidence against Thornton. Blood-stained clothing and personal items belonging to the Miller family was carefully wrapped and secured to Running Fox's horse. The entire tribe gathered to see them off, an honor usually reserved for war parties. Many embraced Ellie or touched her hands in gestures of support and farewell. Children presented her with small tokens: a hawk feather, a pretty stone, a crudely carved wooden figure, tokens of luck for her journey. Morning Dove approached last, Little Thunder secured to her chest in his cradleboard. The young mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You come back," she said, the words halfway between statement and plea. Little Thunder need his second mother. The simple declaration nearly undid Ellie's composure. In the weeks she had lived among the Comanche, Morning Dove had indeed become as close as a sister, sharing childcare duties and domestic tasks, teaching Ellie the women's ways of the tribe with patience and good humor. "I'll come back," Ellie promised, gently touching the infant's round cheek. "Take care of our boy until then." White Eagle performed a brief ceremony of blessing, burning sacred herbs and fanning the smoke over the four travelers with an eagle feather fan. The rich, piney scent clung to their clothing and hair, a reminder of the people and the prayers that would follow them. As they prepared to mount, Rising Thunder approached Ellie one final time. His face was solemn, but something in his eyes spoke of emotions carefully controlled. "You carry future of our people with you," he said quietly, "but also our respect. Whatever happens at Fort, know that Comanche will sing your name for generations to come." It was perhaps the highest praise he could offer, the assurance that, regardless of the outcome of her mission, she would be remembered in the oral traditions of the tribe, her story told around fires long after she was gone. "I won't fail you," Ellie vowed. The chief inclined his head slightly. "I believe this." He turned to Jacob. "Watch over her. Bring her home if you can." "With my life," Jacob promised gravely. With final farewells exchanged, the small party mounted and rode out of the camp. Ellie did not look back until they reached the ridge overlooking the valley. There she paused, taking in the sight of the Comanche encampment spread below, the circle of teepees, the grazing horses, the ribbon of creek winding through the sheltered valley. Home, in a way no other place had ever truly been. Then she turned, her horse eastward, toward Fort Richardson and whatever fate awaited them there. The future of the tribe, her tribe, rested on what would happen in the days ahead. Whatever the cost, she would not let them down. Luck, however, continued to elude them. The terrain, sodden from the storm, slowed their progress significantly. Horses struggled on the muddy ground, and more than once they were forced to dismount and lead their animals through particularly treacherous stretches. By the time dawn broke, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale gold, they had fallen further behind the riders Running Fox had detected. "How much farther to the camp?" Aldridge asked, his face etched with concern as they paused briefly to orient themselves. 2 hours, maybe less," Running Fox replied, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "But others will reach there first." Ellie felt sick with dread. If Thornton and whatever force he had assembled attacked the vulnerable camp, the results would be devastating. The image of Morning Dove clutching Little Thunder to her chest as danger approached was almost unbearable. "We need to warn them somehow," she said desperately. "Give them time to escape or prepare." Running Fox's expression was grim but determined. "I can go ahead. Alone, I move faster." Aldridge hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Go. We'll follow as quickly as we can." Without another word, the Comanche warrior wheeled his horse and galloped away, quickly disappearing into the rolling landscape. Ellie watched him go, hope and fear warring in her chest. Running Fox was indeed their best chance of alerting the camp, but one man against Thornton's band would make little difference if they had already arrived. "Mount up," Aldridge ordered his men. "We push on with all possible speed." They rode hard, driving their exhausted horses beyond what should have been possible. Ellie found herself murmuring encouragement to her mount, promising rest and care once their desperate race was won. The animal responded valiantly, somehow finding reserves of strength when they seemed utterly depleted. As they crested a final ridge, the hidden valley that sheltered the Comanche winter camp came into view, and with it, a scene of chaos that confirmed their worst fears. Smoke rose from several burning tipis, and figures moved frantically throughout the camp. In the distance, they could see a group of riders, Thornton's men, sweeping through the western edge of the encampment, torches in hand. "Dear God," Aldridge breathed, taking in the scene. He raised his hand, signaling his men to halt while he assessed the situation. "How many attackers do you estimate?" Ellie strained to count the mounted figures through the smoke and confusion. "Perhaps 20, she judged, but they're scattered, disorganized. They didn't expect resistance." Indeed, Running Fox's warning appeared to have arrived in time to allow at least some preparation. The Comanche had not fled, but were fighting, back with remarkable effectiveness given their reduced numbers. Warriors on horseback harried the attackers from multiple directions, while women and children retreated to the far side of the encampment where the terrain offered some natural protection. "We need to engage immediately," Ellie urged. "Before they regroup." Aldridge nodded grimly. "Mr. Preston," he addressed his sergeant, "form the men for a charge. Target only the armed riders attacking the camp. We want to minimize casualties on all sides, if possible." As the soldiers prepared to intervene, Ellie searched the chaotic scene below for familiar faces. She spotted Rising Thunder rallying, warriors near the central fire pit, his commanding presence evident even at a distance. Many Stars was shepherding children toward the safety of a rocky outcropping, but where were Morning Dove and Little Thunder? The answer came in a flash of movement that drew her eye to the southern edge of the camp. A lone figure on horseback was racing away from the conflict, pursuing a woman who fled on foot with a child clutched to her chest. Even at a distance, Ellie recognized both pursuer and pursued, Thornton himself chasing down Morning Dove and Little Thunder. Without hesitation, without even calling out to Aldridge, Ellie dug her heels into her horse's flanks and charged down the slope. Nothing else mattered in that moment, not the larger battle, not her own safety, not even the fact that she carried no weapon beyond the small knife in her boot. All that mattered was reaching Morning Dove before Thornton did. Her horse, somehow sensing the desperate urgency, found one last burst of speed. They thundered across the valley floor, closing the distance rapidly. Thornton, focused on his quarry, didn't notice Ellie's approach until she was nearly upon him. When he did glance back, his face contorted with rage and recognition. "You!" he snarled, reining in his horse and wheeling to face her. "You're supposed to be locked up at the fort." Ellie pulled her own mount to a halt, positioning herself between Thornton and the fleeing Morning Dove. "It's over, Thornton," she called out, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Colonel Mackenzie knows everything. About the Millers, about your lies. Soldiers are right behind me. Doesn't matter," he sneered, drawing his revolver with practiced ease. "You won't live to testify against me. Neither will that Indian whore or her brat." The naked hatred in his voice chilled Ellie to the bone, but she held her ground. "The only murderer here is you," she replied, desperately trying to buy time. "You killed an innocent family for their land, then blamed it on people who had nothing to do with it." "Business," Thornton said dismissively. "Just business. This territory needs men of vision, not sentimental fools clinging to worthless farms, or savages clinging to land they can't properly use." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Goodbye, Miss Montgomery. You should have stayed where you belonged." Time seemed to slow as Ellie watched his finger squeeze the trigger. In that stretched moment, she was aware of everything. The weight of many stars' pendant against her throat, the smell of smoke from the burning teepees, the distant shouts of soldiers finally engaging Thornton's men, the soft crying of little thunder as Mourning Dove continued her desperate flight. Then from nowhere, a blur of movement. Running Fox, launching himself from a nearby rise directly onto Thornton's horse. The impact caused the marshal's shot to go wide, the bullet whistling harmlessly past Ellie's ear. Horse and riders went, down in a tangle of thrashing limbs and furious curses. Running Fox recovered first, rolling clear of the fallen horse with the fluid grace of a natural hunter. Thornton struggled to his feet more slowly, his revolver lost in the confusion of the fall. When he saw the Comanche warrior advancing on him, he drew a wicked hunting knife from his belt. "Come on then, savage," he taunted. "Let's finish this." What followed was a deadly dance, knife against knife, as the two circled each other. Thornton had size and strength, but Running Fox had speed and a lifetime of combat training. They feinted and lunged, each seeking an opening in the other's defense. Ellie watched in horror, torn between the instinct to help Running Fox and the need to ensure Mourning Dove and Little Thunder reached safety. The decision was made for her when she saw Mourning Dove stumble and fall several hundred yards away, the child tumbling from her arms. Spurring her exhausted horse forward, Ellie reached the young mother just as she was struggling to her feet, Little Thunder wailing in distress but apparently unharmed. "Are you hurt?" Ellie asked urgently, dismounting to check them both. "No," Mourning Dove gasped, clutching her son close. "Just fall." "Where is Snakeheart Man?" "Fighting Running Fox," Ellie replied, helping her onto the horse. "Get Little Thunder to safety. I'll help Running Fox." As Mourning Dove rode toward the relative safety of the camp's eastern edge, Ellie turned back toward the duel. What she saw froze her blood. Running Fox was down, blood streaming from a wound in his side, while Thornton stood over him with raised knife, preparing to deliver a killing blow. Without conscious thought, Ellie drew the knife from her boot and threw it with all her strength. The small blade wasn't designed for throwing, and her aim was far from perfect, but fate or desperation guided it true enough to strike Thornton's shoulder. Not a lethal hit, but sufficient to spoil his strike and make him howl with pain and rage. He whirled toward her, murder in his eyes, wrenching her knife from his flesh and casting it aside. "You interfering bitch," he snarled. "I'll deal with you first, then finish your savage friend." Ellie backed away, searching frantically for any weapon or advantage. She was no fighter, and Thornton, despite his wound, was a powerful man accustomed to violence. Her only hope was to keep him talking, to delay until help could arrive. "Why do you hate them so much?" she asked, continuing to retreat as he advanced. "The Comanche never did anything to you personally." "They exist," Thornton spat. "They hold land that could make men rich. They resist progress. That's reason enough." He lunged suddenly, knife slashing toward her throat. Ellie jerked backward. The blade missing her by inches, she stumbled on the uneven ground, falling hard onto her back. Thornton was on her instantly, pinning her with his weight, knife raised for a killing strike. "Your precious Indians can't save you now," he gloated. "And when you're dead, I'll finish what I started with their camp. By nightfall, there won't be a living Comanche left in this valley." As the knife descended, Ellie closed her eyes, a prayer to whatever spirits might be listening forming in her mind. But the expected pain never came. Instead, a thunderous report split the air, and Thornton's weight suddenly slumped across her, motionless and heavy. Struggling free, Ellie looked up to see Jacob Wilson standing a few yards away, rifle still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. Behind him stood two wolves, armed with bow and knife, scanning the surroundings for additional threats. "Jacob," Ellie gasped, scarcely believing her eyes. "How?" "Mackenzie sent us after you when more evidence came to light," he explained, hurrying to help her to her feet. Thornton had conspirators at the fort. We only discovered it after you left. The battle was ending now. The combined force of Comanche warriors and Aldridge's cavalry routing what remained of Thornton's mercenaries. Some fled, others surrendered. A few lay motionless on the bloodied ground of the valley. Running Fox was alive but badly wounded, his side slashed deep by Thornton's knife. Ellie knelt beside him, examining the injury with professional detachment despite her racing heart. "You'll live," she told him firmly, "though you'll have an impressive scar to show your grandchildren someday." A ghost of a smile touched his pain-tightened features. "Good story," he managed. "How medicine woman saved warrior, not other way around." As Comanche women came forward to help carry Running Fox to a shelter where Ellie could treat him properly, she looked around at the devastation of the camp. Several teepees had been destroyed by fire, supplies scattered or ruined, horses driven off in the confusion. Yet the human cost could have been far worse. Thanks to Running Fox's warning and the warriors' valiant defense, most of the tribe had survived unharmed. Rising Thunder approached, his face streaked with soot and a minor wound on his arm, but otherwise intact. "You brought soldiers," he observed, eyeing Aldridge's men, who were now securing prisoners and helping extinguish the remaining fires. "They came to help," Ellie assured him. Colonel Mackenzie learned the truth about Thornton. These men saved many lives today. The chief studied the cavalry detachment thoughtfully. "Perhaps not all white men are enemies after all," he conceded. "Not all," Jacob agreed, joining them. "Though there'll always be men like Thornton, driven by greed and hatred. And men like you," Rising Thunder acknowledged with a nod of respect, "who stand with justice." In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over the valley. Captain Aldridge and his men remained long enough to help the Comanche repair the worst of the damage and round up scattered horses. Colonel Mackenzie himself arrived with additional troops, not for combat, but to formally establish a treaty with Rising Thunder's band, guaranteeing them protection if they remained peaceful. It wasn't a perfect solution. The long-term pressures on Comanche lands remained, but it was a beginning. A recognition that coexistence might be possible where mutual respect existed. For Ellie, the path forward was clear. Despite Jacob's gentle suggestion that she might consider returning to Cottonwood Springs now that Thornton's lies had been exposed, her place was with the tribe that had become her family. As woman who speaks with plants, she had found not just purpose, but belonging. On the day Jacob prepared to depart, returning to his ranch with promises to visit when spring made the mountain passes easier to traverse, Ellie walked with him to the edge of the camp. Little Thunder, now recovered from his ordeal and growing plumper by the day, gurgled happily in her arms. "You're sure about staying?" Jacob asked one last time, his weathered face creased with mixed emotions. "You'd be welcomed back in town now. Folks know the truth." Ellie smiled, bouncing Little Thunder gently as he reached for a strand of her silver-streaked hair. "I'm sure," she replied. "This is where I belong now. These are my people." Jacob nodded, accepting her decision with the same quiet dignity he brought to all things. "Then I wish you happiness, Eleanor Montgomery." He corrected himself with a smile, or should I say, woman who speaks with plants. "Either name will do," she told him warmly. "They're both me, after all, just different parts of the same story." As Jacob rode away, Ellie stood watching until he disappeared over the distant ridge. Then she turned back toward the Comanche camp, where Morning Dove was waving her over to help prepare medicines for the coming winter, where many stars sat teaching children the old songs by the central fire, where Rising Thunder and his warriors prepared for a buffalo hunt now that peace was temporarily assured. She had saved a dying Comanche chief from Snakebite, and his tribe had appeared with 80 warriors on painted horses, not to harm her, but to welcome her, protect her, make her one of their own. The path that had led her here was unlikely, even improbable. But standing in the crisp Wyoming air with little thunder warm against her chest, Ellie knew she wouldn't change a single step of the journey. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.